try recording to the cloud. There we go. We are now recording.
Great. My question was, given that the essential childcare is free and that it's a COVID specific that the district is providing, will the district be eligible for COVID-19 specific relief to help counterbalance those funds that you had just said that we're depleting?
Yeah, and so I guess my response to that is yes and no. So we are eligible for COVID-19 related funding for that. So there's money coming to the state that's going to go directly to LEAs or school districts. And that money is going to be sort of, I think it's an up to 80% of what we get for our Title I funds. So that puts us in the $300,000 range that we could be eligible for COVID related expenses. And we are tracking all expenses that we are associating with COVID-19. We have a special code for that. And the cost for the essential persons childcare are included in that. The no part comes from, while we have some funds that may come to us to help cover some of these costs, the reality is that that money comes from somewhere also. And at some point in time, there's going to be some sort of an attempt to recapture money. So in a way, some of that money we receive to cover these costs may eventually be going back somewhere else to cover that recapture. So how that all shakes out in the wash is really hard to know right now. But that's how I'm seeing it at this point. Floyd, feel free to share more if you have something to add to that.
No, I think you're right on the nose. It's we have money coming. Confidence is questionable as to whether or not we're going to get to keep it all.
And whether we get to keep that money but send some different money back, it's kind of all the same in the end. And we can talk a little bit more about that when we get to item E in section 4 on the agenda, where we're talking about COVID-19 financial impacts. So that's just our childcare program. Food service, again, really doing a bang up job serving, making and delivering 1,800 meals a day, a little less. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but less for sure during the pickup window last week during vacation week. But we had 3 locations available for pickup. I don't know if you've seen the pictures on Facebook, but a lot of different themes and costumes and, people having some fun with it and trying to, continue to shine a bright light on the good things that are happening in our community as people are having their needs met, and we're supporting them through that. So great news on that. We did have a little hiccup yesterday for food service. Some of the quality of the food that people were receiving wasn't up to Kathy's standards or our par. So Kathy's been trying to figure out exactly what the root of that was, whether it was some bad material that we got or something missed on the preparation side. But we've got to be well north of, I don't know how many thousands of meals so far, and this is really the only indication of lack of satisfaction that we've been hearing. So still a pretty decent track record, though we need to iron out what the issue was with those meals. Floyd, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, in terms of those meals, I think what we tracked it down to was it was a pretzel and an egg. And when the egg was next to the pretzel, it discolored the pretzel, which gave it a gray hue, which we think is what the individual thought was food that wasn't quite perfect. So we're fairly confident in that because we've seen that evidence of that with a number of other individuals who've checked back with Kathy on that's what they saw. But it wasn't a food quality issue. It was a hard-boiled egg that changed the color of the pretzel a little bit.
Happened to us. We ate it. We were fine.
So
You're still here to tell the tale.
Same with us. We ate it and
Okay.
we're fine.
So with 40 something thousand meals, maybe we've learned to keep the eggs farther away from the pretzel.
I'm sorry I missed it.
I was talking with Kathy today, and I said, if we get to the end of this summer and the biggest complaint was an egg and pretzel together, we had a pretty good run.
Yep. And now remote learning. So no new phases, no big changes. So that's good news. People are really still doing tremendous work, reaching out, supporting families, trying to make it work, continuing to be creative. A lot of phone calls happening for kids that aren't, connected. Really doing everything we can to try and make sure that we're supporting students and families through this and really supporting one another. A lot of good networking among professionals virtually to support one another in finding things that are working and ways they're having some success. So again, despite the challenges and knowing it's still not ideal and we can't replace a day in a school building altogether, some wonderful, wonderful things happening as a result of people coming together to try and overcome these challenges. And I can let Katrina talk more specifically about anything that she wants to add.
Yeah, I think I would only add that 712 is on a course. They've got, their regular progress reports are coming out bi-weekly. People are being, checking in with kids and families. School counselors are being, deployed when there's a communication concern or glitch, and that's also happening at K6. For K6, there is a little bit of newness. Yesterday was sort of the launch of some new literacy interdisciplinary units for kids to be learning more about literacy through a science topic. That's kind of unfolding sort of slowly. It didn't all get hit on folks yesterday. It'll be sort of unfolded for folks as we go. Today, the K6 math teachers engaged in some training with a new product for us called Dreambox. It's a math web-based software program similar to a literacy program we've been using called Lexia, where a student can engage in activities, 15, 20-minute activities and lessons that are at their own level, and it gets re-leveled. So if they've mastered some information, it puts them up a notch to continue to be at an instructional level that makes sense for them. So that's something that will start being rolled out for kids as another option over the next week. But other than that, we feel like we've done enough. Now let's just make sure we're doing a really good job communicating with families, finding that balance, making sure we're not doing too much, but also making sure that kids are engaged and learning and really getting the help that they need to feel successful at home with this weird situation. So lots going on, and we're just constantly checking ourselves on, is it too much? Is it too little? Everybody's situation is different. So it's a very personalized approach to learning that I think is not a bad thing, frankly.
Sarah?
Yeah, I just wanted to hear what the feedback has been from the teachers, because it appears just from my two girls that the collaboration among grades throughout the district, that the teacher, 5, 6 teachers throughout the district are collaborating on the environmental program, and 3, 4 teachers throughout the district are collaborating on the inventions program or project. And I'm just wondering what the feedback has been so far on that collaboration district-wide, because it seems like that kind of collaboration, as far as I know, has never existed to this extent.
Yeah, I mean, I'm starting to coin the phrase pandemic wins, right? So what are some of the wins that we can be identifying right now during this weird situation, right? And some of the wins are, it's forced us to collaborate even more heavily than we ever have before, which honestly is a win. Like, people are really talking to each other, and these Zoom conferences and these webinars and these online professional development sessions that we've been doing are really rich. We are very fortunate in that we have already invested in the embedded PD and the instructional coaches that we have and the coordinators that we have and the talent that we have to already be able to say, okay, let's put that aside and let's create a screencastify, mini lesson that we can share with other K2 teachers about what this could look like. So there's been some really, really amazing collabs that we couldn't have predicted that would have happened this quickly. Although I will also say that since the beginning of the year, this year has been our big year for more professional learning community time. We've come together more as grade units since August. So happily, that foundation was kind of already there. So the relationships were already built. So when this happened, it just meant kick everybody up a notch, right? So you've already been working with the other two, K2 teachers. Now let the coaches and coordinators support you to kind of build the curriculum in this way. So it has been extremely well received. The feedback from teachers has been, thank you so much. And there's also been like some teachers who have said, okay, that's a lot. I feel like I have something going on with my class right now. So give me a couple of days and then I'll be ready to fold that in. So it's really just a matter of constant communication amongst our teams.
And having said that, it really is being taken to a totally different level. Because no one's physically present in any building, there isn't sort of these confines or these almost obstructions to collaboration across buildings that people feel when they're in a structure that has 4 walls that they feel confined to. Now they could be anywhere literally in the world and be just as close and just as connected to their colleagues as if they were in the same room. So it is taking it to a whole new level. And I think this is going to be one of those COVID wins, I think is the term you use, Katrina, when school does resume. That kind of collegiality that was starting to build, that is now on a whole different plane, is going to pay dividends in the future. There are going to be a lot more Zoom meetings going forward when we resume school.
It's just so much more efficient in so many ways. People are saying it all over the place. Like, we can just drop what we're doing, check in with our colleagues from across 5 schools, and then get back to business. It's pretty great.
And so I guess just in wrapping up this update, there have been a few different articles in the Independent that are really just great articles and worth a read if you haven't seen them. One on the childcare programming, another on the postcard initiative that the Community Engagement Committee has been working on. So and there are a couple of other stories in the works as well. So keep your eyes on the Independent as a good place for our story being told.
Krista's joined us and she raised her hand. So Krista?
Sorry, there may be another way to raise it, but I'm not sure. And sorry for being late and having some technical difficulties. You guys might have touched on this, but I was just wondering what, if any, thinking you're doing about assessing students and if you're feeling pressure around that at all. I mean, I'm speaking as a parent who feels like there should be no pressure around that because I have a lot of concerns about how to make that work. And have that be the driver for the way teachers can be creative and flexible right now. But I just wondered what you guys are thinking about that and what this direction you might be getting from the state, or I don't know.
A little different 7-12 than it is K6, just in terms of what was already in place. And seniors in a different place probably than others in terms of graduation requirements, but generally speaking, really trying to focus on what is essential. One of the things I heard recently from a webinar several weeks back when we were early in our new remote learning phase, a group of national educators coming together for this sort of webinar saying, think about what your priorities are for your learning for students, cut that in half, and then cut it in half again. And that's what you should be focusing on with students during this remote learning. And so I've shared that a couple of times with our administrative team. That's the message that we want out there. it's really easy to get to try and grow something beyond what is reasonable, and without a focus and without priorities, we can just sort of be all over the map. So really being focused, having priorities is the start to that concept of assessment. Let's be really clear about what's important. And then again, thinking secondarily, the 7-12 group, they've been engaged in proficiency-based learning for a long time. So that concept of focus and clarity on what we want students to know and be able to do, and separating that from their work habits, is well ingrained, and they've been doing that through Google Classroom already. So in some ways at the secondary level, they've been able to kind of continue on a path that they were already on. A little different at the elementary level, because they were just starting down that path a little bit in terms of proficiencies. And so not quite as tight there in terms of assessment. I can let Katrina fill in some more of those details.
Right, so the direction has been to identify, as Patrick said, what the state is calling the critical proficiencies. So what are the priorities, the narrowed down absolute have-tos that we want to make sure are part of our continuity of learning plans. So in K-6, that translates to 5 literacy proficiencies and 5 math proficiencies. So learning targets that we're going to focus all of our activities and lessons and new units on that make sense for kids to be engaging in, so that what we can assess is really not necessarily attainment of those learning targets or proficiencies, but progress towards attaining those learning targets or proficiencies, and engagement. So really it's progress and engagement is really the two real like nuggets that we can really hone in on right now. Everybody's situation is different. So as long as we have evidence that kids are engaging in the information, in the resources, in the activities, in any way that we're able to provide them, whether it be remotely or in some paper form or, you know, in some outreach way, that to me is enough evidence that we're assessing that there's either progress and or engagement happening for kids. At 7-12, the courses that kids are engaged in already, already had identified learning targets and proficiencies. So what they're working on and continue to work on is how to narrow those down into absolute critical. Like what would you really, out of all of the 10 or 15 learning targets that we wish kids could have access to and attain by June, what are the most critical, so that when they come back in the fall or whatever we come back to, they're able to, you know, stand on solid ground and have some solid footing so we can help keep them moving. There really isn't, to be honest, a ton of pressure from the state in terms of exactly what that has to look like. They give guidance. The curriculum directors in the region are sharing a lot of templates about reporting right now. So we're playing with some different ideas about what that could look like for families, but it's still pretty district focused at the moment.
And really, you know, assessment has a couple of different purposes. So one purpose is to demonstrate whether or not they've attained the learning that we want them to, so that we can report that somewhere. The other is really just to understand what do they know relative to what we want them to know, so that we can help them. So our focus right now is understanding what they know and can do, so that we can be clear about what support they need, so that we can provide that support in whatever way possible. That's really the assessment we're focusing on, and it happens in so many different ways. It might be an assessment from a special educator having a phone conversation with a student that doesn't have internet access, or for whatever reason didn't get on their Zoom call, or it could be an actual product that the student creates through Google Classroom. There's so many different ways that less formal, more formative assessment is happening, so that we can be sure that we're dialing up and dialing down the support that is needed to help them be successful.
I feel like you all asked us this question like in February, what would our ideal learning environments look like? And while this isn't exactly it, this is a lot closer to personalized learning than what we were doing when you asked us that question. So I'm not that sad. I mean, I am sad, but I'm not that sad.
The trick is going to be, how do we capitalize on this momentum when we're all back in the same building, and keep what we have learned and valued from this in what is a more traditional setting. And it'll be a lot easier to do that after this experience than it was prior to this experience. We've now all experienced something very different and much less traditional. And we know it can be done.
Kristen?
So I just had a couple things, and so there's the academic aspect of everything that's going on, and then there's the connection piece, which people are already doing studies, which you guys probably know about, that community meetings for classrooms have been very beneficial for kids and feeling connected and not isolated. And I know that the middle school is doing a great job in providing academics, but my son on his crew has not had any community meetings such as advisories or anything yet. I think they're doing a great job on the academics. It's very organized. There's great videos explaining stuff. So I'm just wondering if the middle school is planning on doing any community meetings on Zoom, especially for middle school students who I think need connection almost more than anybody, or need to feel connected. And then the other question was just about, what are you guys thinking about seniors and graduation at this point? I think a lot of people would be interested in that, hearing that. Thank you.
Sure. My sense is it's a little different team by team in the middle school. So I don't know what necessarily the answer is there in terms of those community connections. I know we've had conversations about those community connections and really maintaining strong emphasis on the social emotional learning aspect. So I guess I don't have a lot to offer there. I don't know if Katrina has something more to add to that, but the SEL component is very much something that we're mindful of and needs to happen.
I'm actually surprised to hear that, Kristen, and so we'll definitely follow up, because our understanding and all of the plans that have been shared with us is that there are definitely Wednesday advisories. Wednesday is like the big advisory day, the day that school counselors reach out to kids and families who haven't otherwise been engaged at the beginning of the week. So if there's a disconnect there, I'm happy to follow up for sure. But our expectation and what we've been made to understand in terms of the planning has been that every single kiddo is still engaged in their advisory once a week. And so I'm surprised to hear that, and we'll definitely follow up for sure. And then the whole school counseling department has a plan for, you know, Ann Fisher following up if there has been a disconnect between a kiddo and a teacher or a group of teachers. So we certainly can kind of go back and make sure that there aren't any holes there, because that has been the expectation, and I don't think it should be that different from team to team.
And as far as the seniors, I've had several conversations with Shannon. We've been talking a lot about what that looks like, what the expectations are, what's allowable. And I know she's been working with a group of students as well and thinking about what graduation could look like. And really, we're mostly in conversation stages right now, because by May 8th, the Secretary of Ed is supposed to be giving guidance on those end of year celebrations and things like that. So again, we're kind of hesitant to get too deep into the planning without knowing what will or won't be allowed. But definitely a lot of brainstorming about, if it can't be anything like the traditional kind of graduation, what are some of the options? And we're getting the student voice in making some of those decisions. And I know because the secretary has to give this guidance by May 8th, he has sent out a survey to all superintendents trying to make an informed decision in terms of the guidance that they put out. The challenge from the state perspective, I get it, is it's really tricky to issue guidance that is applicable across all situations throughout the entire state, because we're in such different places across the state. An example being, if the guidance was that all graduations had to happen virtually, well, some communities have real struggles with access to technology for something like that. Other communities have no problem accessing that kind of technology. So that is guidance that they couldn't give. So it puts them in a tough spot in terms of giving guidance, puts us in a tough spot in terms of receiving guidance, because typically we get guidance and then groups of people have to interpret what the guidance means so that we know how to move forward in an advised way. So I guess circling back, we're talking a lot about what could be and waiting for some more guidance so we know what will or won't be allowed. I know one idea so far has been a banner hanging up on the streets like you'd see at the 4th of July or something. Like a lot of interesting ideas to try and, no matter what is allowed or not allowed, making graduation something special for our seniors. And it's not limited to graduation. You know, what could something for prom look like? Like there are some significant spring events that are really important in a kid's life that we want to be sure we're thinking about all of those important events and trying to make this as special a time for especially our seniors as possible.
Are there any old drive-in theaters we could rent? Everybody shows up in their car.
Maybe, or could we make one? Yeah. And we'll have the yardsticks out to keep cars far enough away from each other.
See, you might get to use my backyard after all.
There we go. We do have a giant parking lot at Mount Abe, so we could put that to good use.
Anyone else?
You could send a drone around with all of the diplomas.
There we go.
Okay. I don't see anybody putting hands up. All right, we'll keep moving along then. Next item is under board management and governance is to accept the monitoring report 4.5 board members code of conduct, and that was sent in a separate email. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Steve?
I second. Andrew?
Andrew? Okay, any discussion? Okay, so then I'll ask you the two questions. Based on the information provided, does the board find that the board's interpretation is reasonable? Thumbs. Thumbs. Oh, everybody's jumping around. Hang on. Yep. Okay. Any opposed? All right. All right. Does the data demonstrate the accomplishment of this interpretation? Yes. Okay. Any no's? All right. Looks like the yeses have it. All right. All those in favor of accepting the board monitoring report for 4.5 board members code of conduct, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. All right.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Okay. Next is an update on negotiations. We're still in confidential negotiations with both professional and support staff, and we're still having conversations and working through our issues. I don't know if any other bargaining council members wanted to add anything.
Just that support staff is meeting on Thursday. We'll see. We could potentially wrap it up on Thursday. Should be great.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Are you finding the Zoom meetings are effective for this kind of process or less effective for this kind of process?
I would say they're challenging. We've had a couple of little technical difficulties that make things stretch out longer than they have to because we're all trying to figure it out sort of on the fly. And it's harder to have a conversation that gets pretty deep, and I would say, I mean, other members can comment as well.
I think it's
Yeah,
been,
I would agree.
I think it's been all right. I can't say that I've had a lot of trouble with it.
There's a lot of pregnant pauses where everyone's kind of just like, you know, deciding on whether or not we can maintain, the same level of trust and process, given that we're not, sharing the same room. But I think in the end, it always we come around to that.
Someone said to me today in an interview about it was really around prioritizing, and the statement was something about, sometimes if something falls through the cracks, maybe it should. So that's how I think of some of these meetings. Like, sometimes they're more efficient because we're being more deliberate about what we're saying, because we're being a little more cautious of our airtime, because it means you're highlighted or you're cutting somebody off and you're trying to wait for your way in. And I think sometimes that's not a terrible thing. That's my 2 cents.
Krista.
I would just add too that I think this is now our 3rd contract maybe that we've negotiated, maybe 4th contract that we've negotiated through the critical issues bargaining process, which is a much more collaborative process. And over the years of negotiating contracts this way, there's been a relationship built that I think is the only reason we're even meeting right now. There are plenty of districts that are not meeting currently because it would be really hard to do traditional bargaining in our virtual world right now. So despite some of the challenges, and I kind of agree with Steve. I think it's working okay. It's definitely not as ideal as sitting in the room together. But I think we've paved the way to make it something that we can still be doing and doing fairly well, all things considered.
I mean, for support staff, right? Sarah and Kristen, we even brought out sticky notes last time. We weren't bringing out the sticky notes in that conference room when we should have, and we brought it out virtually last time. That was pretty impressive, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
Krista, did you have a question?
No, I was just going to say similar to what Patrick said, which is, I mean, I'm not negotiating this round, but I just think it's so great that we did all of that work with the collective, the CIB work, and that puts us in probably such a better position to navigate negotiations in general and the negotiations via Zoom in particular. So yeah, it's worth it to do the hard stuff sometimes.
All right. If there aren't any other questions, the next item on our list is to an update from the Community Engagement Committee. And Krista, do you want to speak to anything?
Sure. So we, you can see from the minutes on the agenda that we met 2 weeks ago, and our plan, unless it conflicts with our board meetings, is to meet every 2 weeks. And it's pretty informal right now. I mean, I think we're, both times that we've met since everything, since the time we are now in, we've heard some good updates from Patrick, which I think has been really helpful, and people have had a chance to ask questions, which has been really helpful. And then, the group's just done some brainstorming about how we can stay connected with our community during this time. So the 3 ideas that were talked about in the minutes, interviewing different people in the MAUSD community, doing the postcard project, and then putting up messages of gratitude around our schools are things that are ongoing. So it's great to get some press in the Independent around those, and I think that will continue, and we'll just probably keep going as we're going. As the work of the facilities group moves forward, there will probably be or maybe a different role for the Community Engagement Committee to take, but right now we're just kind of trying to keep people connected in whatever way we can. So thanks to those board members that have been participating in those conversations.
Any questions? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody with a hand up. Okay, so our next item is the update on the legislative update, and Kevin's been really good about sending those out, but I'll let him have a few minutes to add.
Okay, I did send out highlights again this month, and I did also send out a working document that I thought might be of interest of the nuts and bolts and the initiatives and how the VSBA staff is reacting to the initiatives that are set up to further the business of the VSBA. The major discussion, our last meeting, which was the 8th, I think it is, so it could very well be old news by now, was some discussions, activities in the House or the Senate Ed Committee that was looking to level load based on last year's budgets. Any town that does not have an approved budget, which there are, I think, 18, if I recall properly. Nine were voted down, and 9 just hadn't normally gone through their voting process. A lot of discussion centered around that. Senate Ed changed their tack a little bit from last year's budget plus some sort of increase to just level funding. And so the VSBA, through discussions, took the position to encourage Senate Ed as they walk down that path to first and foremost give the towns enough time that they can go through whatever voting process they feel is adequate to go through and adopt the budget. And then secondarily, if that time gets too stretched out or whatever, allow some sort of a adder or some sort of percent increase over the previous year's budget. And the interesting thing is, in a group like that, you're hearing from people all over the state. Some were on easy street, and they actually had more per pupil allotments, if you will, or calculations that their budget would actually be overinflated even at a level basis, all the way to other districts that were going through some significant changes, and we're looking at 10% increases to offer through their budget to the voters. So it's a very broad-based issue. Fortunately, we don't have to deal with it, but it consumed pretty much everything else in that meeting. So that's pretty much the highlight from the last meeting.
Okay, I don't see anybody with any questions. Thanks, Kevin, for keeping us up to date.
You're welcome.
All right, the next item is a discussion around the COVID-19 financial impact. Patrick, you want to get us started?
Sure. Yeah, so, and we've talked some about this in a few different places. I know a couple of times in the Community Engagement Committee, but it's definitely, for sure, COVID-19 is going to have a significant impact on FY21, especially. FY20, I think is going to be fine. We've been assured that all the funds that we have been expecting to come in FY20 will come in. So really the main concern now is shifting to FY21 and what that's going to mean, in particular with, contractually, we had to send out letters of intent to rehire to professional staff. The support staff are due to go out contractually this Friday. So sort of in this tricky spot of not knowing what really next year is going to look like. But having to make commitments to people because otherwise we're in violation of contract. Right now, we recently learned there was I think it was a calculation error basically at the state level from the state economists and what they had been projecting the shortfall to be. It was originally looking like an $89 million shortfall. It looks like a $69 million. The reality is we don't really know what the impact is going to be financially. Some estimates put it in the $100 to $150 million impact. And a lot of discussion about what makes sense and how to tackle that. So many moving pieces. What we know is because a third of the education fund comes from consumption taxes, and those consumption taxes are taking a big hit, there's going to be a major impact on the ed fund. One idea that's being discussed right now is the potential of the state borrowing money to cover those lost revenues and then paying that back over time. So rather than absorbing the entire hit over a brief period of time, we borrow the money and we sort of absorb that hit over a longer period of time. So a lot of different discussions happening right now about how best to approach that. But the reality is there's a significant financial impact on the horizon. And for us, that's going to be a significant financial impact on top of already other significant financial impacts that we were anticipating with declining enrollment. If the waiting study goes through, that's another significant impact on us financially. There's talk of delaying Act 173, which actually was going to benefit us financially. So some really big moving targets as we go into FY21 and really even as we build FY22. That's the gist of it. And obviously, depending on how we solve these really tricky problems, it's going to have quite a range of potential impact on the tax rate. You know, I've heard impacts as high as 26 cents on the tax rate, which is huge. Something down lower to the 4 cents if the state borrowed money, we tackle this over a longer period of time. So again, really large moving targets that make it hard to to fully anticipate what we can expect. The good news is, you know, Floyd and I have talked several times already about the importance of doing what we can to position ourselves to absorb some sort of clawback, if you will, next year. We fully anticipate something expected to either to not receive or to be expected to return money in some significant way. And we've been strategizing, you know, so we have this locker room project that fortunately came in less than we thought. So trying to make sure we get maybe as much of that done with FY20 dollars as we can to free up FY21 dollars that we have in construction services that could go to a clawback. And just sort of other concepts like that we're trying to think ahead to be able to free up as much money as we might be able to in FY21, meaning we might not get some things done that we'd hope to, but to diminish the impact that a clawback might have on, in particular, the teaching and learning that's happening in their district.
Floyd, it looked like you were trying to say something. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I just, I could see myself lighting up and I don't know what noise I'm making to make it happen. So I apologize.
That's all right. Does anyone else have a question?
Back to, Sarah had the question before about some money that we might be eligible for in terms of expenses related to COVID-19. So let's say we get $300,000 to help with some of the expenses related to COVID-19. That $300,000 then in some way, shape, or form, right? So that shows up as a revenue. In a way, we can have that as funds that go toward a recapture as well. So one way or another, things are going to have to be made whole, and we're trying to position ourselves to do as much as we can, as much as is expected, to make that whole while minimizing the impact on our organization.
Dave?
So given that we do expect a significant impact negatively in our budget, and that 80% of the budget, roughly speaking, is personnel costs, what alternative or strategies are being considered with regard to personnel costs?
So we've been having several conversations already about some positions that are vacant, and either not filling or only partially filling those positions. I'm thinking of, off the top of my head, 6, 7 positions that are budgeted for FY21 that that either won't be filled or will be very partially filled going into that. And that's the current thinking, and that could still shift a little bit, but that's really the strategy, is how can we take advantage of attrition that has been created or will be created. You know, there are still some folks have an extension to return their contracts until April 30th. So there may still be additional people who choose to not return because they've, you know, sought employment elsewhere or moving or whatever their circumstance may be. And so my message to all of my administrators is every single position that's vacated, we need to scrutinize and ask ourselves if that's a position we have to fill going forward. Not just because of COVID-19, although that's absolutely a piece of it, but in addition, knowing that what our struggles were going to be financially anyway, every position we don't fill is likely one less person that needs to get riffed going into FY22. So it's effectively the same strategy we've taken at least the last year or two, and we've had a lot of success with that. So, you know, the fact that we were able to reduce 12.25 positions going into FY21 without having to riff a single person is evidence of taking advantage of attrition that's been created. So we're going to continue to use that strategy going forward.
Dave?
So as we know, the state is an outlier nationally with regard to building administration costs and district administration costs. And I wondered what in particular administrative costs were being considered.
Yeah, so we have a building administrator who is leaving, is taking a different job somewhere else next year. It's one of the assistant principals at Mount Abe, and we're really looking at that position and thinking about whether or not to fill and how to maybe restructure utilizing the current personnel. So that's one example of some of the administrative positions that we're working on. We're also looking at, it's not an administrator position, but it's a central office position. One of our accountant positions that we're looking at not filling fully. We can't not replace the person who's left, but we're likely to be targeting a dramatically reduced FTE in replacing that time. So we are looking at every position that becomes vacated and seeking alternatives to filling that, at least not fully. Administrative positions included.
Kristen?
Part of the trick, I will say, in terms of the building administrators is, I think it's very difficult the concept of a principal in overseeing multiple buildings seems to make sense, but in reality, it's tricky. So part of, and the reality is we're not as overstaffed administratively as we are in a lot of other areas when you look at the education quality standards. But part of the reason we need the administrators we do is because of the number of buildings that we operate that need some sort of presence in them, just to make sure that we're compliant with everything we need to be compliant with. So as we continue to have the conversations about our facilities and how many schools we operate, the number of administrators we have are part of that conversation, along with lots of other positions.
So I was just going to mention that we have the reserve fund, which people voted on in March. which I think that's about $240,000.
Yeah,
And
more like 250. Yeah.
250. And so is that, I mean, I don't know what level of give back or whatever you're thinking of, but is that already allocated for something? Do you guys have stuff in mind for it? Or is that something that could be used towards any deficit or whatever you want to call it?
That's something that could be used for sure. Like that's a fund that there's definitely some flexibility in how the board uses it. And the board does have authority to spend that money. That doesn't require taxpayer action or an action of the electorate. The question really is, in terms of the unknowns with the new health insurance, that money was there because of some of the moving targets with that and the challenging nature of predicting what we will realize for health insurance expenses. In particular, because next year we're gonna be seeing the higher cost for the current plans in the first half of next year, and the highest cost of the new plans in the second half of next year. So it's a little bit of a double whammy in next fiscal year, which is why we wanted to have that fund there to cover us should we have budgeted insufficient funds to cover those expenses. If what we recaptured covers our expenses in healthcare, then yes, that 250,000 is something we could look at as funds for some sort of a recapture. And whether or not that would be sufficient, I don't know. I suspect whatever the recapture is going to be would be more than $250,000 from our district. So it could be a combination of that and something else if that was something that was available. Or it may be that the strategy is we find the recapture money somewhere else and we leave that reserve fund if we can, because it's nice to maintain sort of an insurance policy, if you will, if we can maintain it. But if we have to tap into that insurance policy, then we do.
Krista?
Sorry, can you explain the recapture concept again? So are you saying like if we're not able to meet what we approved for our budget for next year through property taxes and ed fund shortfalls, is that what we would need to?
No, it's really as they're trying to sort of replenish the ed fund,
right,
because of the loss of revenue from COVID-19. I'm expecting that there's going to be some sort of attempt to recapture funds to help make up the loss of revenue. So that's really the recapture that I'm talking about.
And that's coming out of this year's budget.
FY21.
FY21. Okay, thank you.
Next year's budget. That's the suspicion. How much exactly, and will it be just next year, or will it be several years? There's a lot of uncertainty with that. The only certainty is, one way or another, the ed fund needs to get money put back in.
Dave?
So I also don't quite understand this recapture. Are you talking about money that the state will find to inject into FY20 budgets that will need to be recaptured in 21? Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm really just talking about there likely won't be enough money in the ed fund in FY21 to cover all the budgets that passed because of the loss of revenue from COVID-19. So somehow or another, either they're going to not distribute as much money to districts in FY21, or they're going to expect some sort of payment from districts in FY21 to help replenish the lost revenue from the consumption taxes during COVID-19. And so that's really what we're trying to position ourselves for, is if the state says we need $750,000 from your district, either the state says you're not going to get $750,000 or some other figure, I'm just sort of pulling that number out of thin air, or says you need to give us $750,000, we need to be prepared to respond.
So you're talking about FY21 shortfall in the education fund that
Correct.
Will impact local budgets.
Exactly.
And if the state were to find money, borrow it through the treasurer's office or whatnot to fully fund budgets, for 21. Perhaps in 22 or later years, they're going to want to recapture that money. Is that what is that
Right.
a clear understanding?
Even if the state borrows money to replenish the ed fund, that loan needs to be repaid, and that repayment is going to come from the local schools one way or another to be made. So
thank you.
It's how much and for how long we'll be paying, we don't know, but we know we're going to have to pay something to replenish the ed fund.
Okay, I see Krista and then Steve.
Well, I was just thinking about the money that's supposed to be coming in the way of COVID relief to districts specifically, not to the ed fund. And if that will balance out, I mean, I guess that's all, who knows, but you can't really.
Right, and that's sort of what the conversation we had earlier when Sarah was inquiring about funds that may come to the district for COVID expenses. So it's true that we are likely to be eligible for significant funding, a few $100,000 maybe. And the idea is, here's some money that will help cover your COVID costs. And then we'll be asking for that back and then some, probably, to help replenish the ed fund. So how much of it will wash, I don't know, because we don't know what the actual figures are going to be. But yeah, that's a revenue source that we'll get, and that will help, I think, offset some of the money we're going to have to send back to help replenish the ed fund.
Okay, Steve and then Caleb.
So it's probably more likely that it's going to be a reduction in the amount of revenue they would normally provide, isn't it?
It could be, yeah. I am remembering the clawback days. So I'm hesitant to say what I think it will be, because I think there's a lot of options being discussed, and I think pretty much anything is on the table in terms of how to make this happen. I agree, it's probably most likely that it's going to be a reduction in revenue that's given to school districts, because that's an easier way, just logistically, to make sure that the money that they need is received, because it never leaves their hands.
Right.
Caleb?
Thank you. Yeah, I for what it's worth, I have not heard anything in House Ed about a clawback of funds. I have heard about borrowing, borrowing in order to basically replace revenue shortfalls in FY20 for the final part of FY20, but that FY21 is a lot murkier. The one thing I'll just say is that, if we didn't do anything, of course, the yield could change, as we talked about last time, which would drastically change property tax rates, which I think is what Patrick was alluding to earlier. And so that we want to, so I don't know if the cost to run the schools is sort of X and we're missing $100 million, it's sort of like the slider just by default, as I understand them, the formulas that exist, just basically puts that back on taxpayers, so you would have a much higher rate than was warned in association with this budget, because that yield, it's just a huge difference. So because that revenue shortfall is a question mark that keeps going, and so that I would guess that would either have to be replaced by potentially more borrowing for FY21, and then of course you've got that debt service, but it does seem like just sort of letting the formula shift all of that lost revenue over to the property tax part of the fund, it just isn't possible. I mean, it would be a completely unprecedented year-on-year shift. So anyway, but I haven't sorry if that rambled, but I haven't heard anything about an actual taking back of revenues that have already been, or monies that have already been dispensed to districts. But I know they did that with the healthcare thing a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the trick there. It is very much uncertain exactly what's going to happen. It's just that we know something's going to happen. As Caleb said, it would be an absolute backbreaker to the taxpayers to just absorb the entire loss of revenue. So that seems highly unlikely to me. And so in some way, shape, or form, that money is going to be recaptured. And we're trying to put ourselves in the best position that we can to respond in whatever way it's going to come across to do so. And I feel like we have a couple of really sound strategies to help us do that. I talked about the not filling positions. That's going to help us tremendously. And in this current year where we also didn't fill some positions, to take care of some things that would otherwise be expenses in FY21 with an FY20 budget that is healthy is going to also put us in good position. So I'm thinking about the locker room project as probably the biggest ticket. So the original projection on the locker rooms was 2.9 million, came in closer to 2.2 million, 2.1, 2.2. And so we're looking at trying to do as much of that 2 million, or 1.9 million, came in at 1.2 instead of 1.9. So we're looking to do as much of that locker room project out of the current fiscal year as possible, which frees up some funds that otherwise were planning to be spent in FY21. So that sort of positioning is some of the work that's happening right now. And I think that's going to put us in much better shape than I would say most districts will be in to absorb whatever the hit's going to be in FY21.
Steve?
We found that the contractors are still able to honor their bid under the current circumstances, or is there any noise about additional costs due to the circumstances?
I can let Floyd respond. I haven't heard anything that indicates that they're not willing to stay on track with what the agreement is.
We had a conversation today with Truex and with the contractor Russell, and there's no discussion about changing any of the bid numbers at this point. The bigger issue is can they move fast enough with enough people on site to get it done? Not a question of whether or not there's any fear that their numbers are not going to be able to be met.
Interesting.
Kevin?
I got just a couple tactical procedural questions. Is one, if I recall in our executive limitations, there's a clause, something about budget and spending out a budget once it is approved without significant deviation of line items and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know if maybe that's mostly on the expense side as opposed to the revenue side, but if we get into some really wonky stuff in 21, are we looking at the fact where we as a board would be becoming more involved in, or would there be more cognizance of that executive limitation forcing certain communications about changes in strategy on budgeting? And then I guess the other thing is more of a comment than anything else is I'm assuming that we are treating every little handout or promise of money as a contract obligation, even though it's probably not defined as that, so that as the financial house starts to fall apart in 21, we have good documentation as to who's what, and it's not a bunch of industrial or maybe better coined bureaucratic amnesia about who said what and that sort of thing. It just will make it a lot easier to explain things as the road gets tougher.
Yeah, I guess to the 2 points, I think the first one is a good conversation to have and really talk about that policy and how that plays out. I think the policy you're speaking to talks about spending unbudgeted funds, and the fact that we have the $1 million budgeted for construction services. The way we've been operating has been that as long as we're spending the money within that million, and that's considered to be budgeted funds and not unbudgeted funds. But I think it's important. I mean, regardless, it's important for the board to be in the know in terms of what's happening with big projects like that. But in terms of the board's involvement in the decision-making on the spending of that, I think that's a good conversation to have from a policy perspective and policy governance, because I think it can be interpreted different ways. So it's worth making sure that we're all seeing it the same way. So I think that'd be a great conversation. In terms of the sort of tracking and we're definitely tracking expenses that are related to COVID-19. We're definitely going to be tracking funds that come in to cover those expenses. We're talking with vendors. We just had a conversation with Betcha Transit yesterday, I think it was, to really talk about, okay, so now we know this is something that's going to be in place for the long haul. You're not transporting kids, but you are delivering meals. So what kind of an agreement can we make to this contract with that vendor that recognizes the new reality? So they're working on a proposal for us that we'll probably see sometime next week. So there's definitely a lot of those kinds of conversations that we're paying attention to in terms of the financial house for FY20, which has an impact on our financial situation for FY21. I don't know if that directly answers your question, Kevin, if that's what you're looking for, if there's something different.
No, the second was just a comment on awareness, and the first statement is, I think I agree that, you know, once we get into the dicey stuff, I'm not proposing the board start getting into the nuts and bolts of the budget, but I think if there's some significant departures, or I can't remember the exact wording, with the budget, you know, obviously there's some sort of a notification process that needs to be kept in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Okay. All right. So that is bringing us down to the end of our list. Because we have an executive session, and Patrick, do we have anybody who any attendees?
We do have an attendee, and it's showing up as Neat TV.
Oh, well, before we go into executive session, let's see if there's any if they have any public comment they'd like to make. Not seeing anything. All right. And we could actually go through the meeting evaluation. Does somebody have that up by chance?
I can get it if you want me to, Don.
Okay, that'd be great.
Got it. All right, is everybody ready? I'm gonna take that as a yes.
Lots of nodding.
Okay, I'm not looking at my screen, so definitely speak up. What is the level of engagement of all board members? High, low? Gonna go for high?
High.
Hi.
Aye.
All right. And Don, I think they said something, whoever filled this out at the last meeting, that it's got a yes or no answer for question number 3.
Yeah, there must be 2 copies of it around. We keep getting the wrong.
Yeah.
All right, I'll write a note.
Okay. Was the agenda followed, yes or no?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Does the chair effectively establish the agenda and materials for distribution to the board? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
If there's any comments, just speak up along the way here.
Is the chair effective in fostering a professional culture regarding fair and open deliberation, full participation of all members, and ensuring the integrity of the board process?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Is there any other feedback for the chair? I'm gonna go with none. Okay. What went well with the meeting? Everyone safe? Comfy?
That sounds good.
Meetings are fairly short on Zoom.
Well, we're not done yet.
They don't call it Zoom for nothing.
I spoke too soon, maybe.
Now you're going to take all the blame, Andrew, if it doesn't go smoothly from here on out.
What suggestions do you have for ways to improve future meetings? Okay. Okay. None? Go on. All right. You were done.
All right. Thank you, Chris.
No problem. Dawn, are you guys going to take action when you come out of the meeting, or are you going to finish the minutes?
We're just going to adjourn the meeting afterwards, and so that'll be our only action. I just want to go over what's about to happen before people just disperse and we try to do it. So because we're in this webinar, we're unclear if when Patrick leaves, if we will still have access to this. So if it happens that when Patrick leaves that we lose this, go to your email and check. I'll send another meeting out for Zoom so we can rejoin, kind of thing.
And I can offer a little more clarity on that, Don. So as the host, I can remove everyone but myself. When I'm gone, the meeting ends. So
we are.
You should probably plan on that other invitation from you.
Patrick, can you change the host? Usually you can change the host.
I tried, but because the webinar feature is only for paid subscriptions.
Right.
So I tried to change it to Dawn.
Right. I have a paid, oh, it's Dawn's. So maybe she's the only one that can change it.
I tried to change it to, it's on the subscriptions under my name. I tried to assign host to Dawn, but because Dawn doesn't have a paid subscription, I think is the reason why it wouldn't.
I do. If you want to do me, I have one under my name.
But is it Chris? Is it your MAUSD?
Kristen Blanchett. If it would be simpler, I can send you my email.
Yeah, it's a different window that I have to go into to edit it, and I'm not sure.
Okay, it might be too tricky.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it will let me edit while we're in. Let me see. I'm in that window right now.
Just don't forget to stop the recording.
Oh, but that's right.
All right. So, Kristen, what is the email that I should try?
I put it in the chat.
Okay, I don't have that.
If you push chat down there.
Yeah, I just had to get back to a different screen here. A Blanchett 13. And it says K Blanchett 13 at Comcast.net is not a user in your Zoom account. So it seems
okay. All right. Sorry.
Sorry.
Okay. So what we'll all end up leaving this meeting and joining the next invitation that I'll send when I get out of here. So, but what we need to do in this meeting is to enter into executive session. So under Title I, VSA 5313A3, evaluation of an employee, we don't need to establish that premature knowledge will put the district at a disadvantage. We just need to have a motion to go into executive session, and everybody else is done, and we'll continue on in that next invitation.
So moved.
Steve,
I second.
Andrew. Okay, all those in favor of going into executive session under Title I VSA 5313A3, evaluation of employee at 7:38, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so we're in. All of you leaving us, have a good night. It'll take me a couple minutes to resend, but so take a quick break and come back to your email and check.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Patrick.
Bye.